Geiger counter on my belt started clicking faster than my heartbeat. I was standing 200 feet above the Texas plains, inside the skeletal framework of a nuclear reactor containment vessel, and something was very wrong. The radiation readings were climbing, which meant one of two things. Either the shielding was compromised, or someone had installed radioactive material where it didn't belong. I'm Dennis Stone, 54 years old, and in 28 years of nuclear construction, I'd never heard that particular rhythm of clicks before. It sounded like trouble. "Dennis, we need these welds signed off today," Brandon Wells shouted over the industrial fans. He was 29, Stanford MBA, and had been on site exactly 3 weeks. His hard hat was spotless white, like his understanding of nuclear safety protocols. "The inspection team flies in Monday. Corporate needs to see progress for the IPO. I adjusted the sensitivity on my dosimeter and swept it over the reactor vessel wall again. Click, 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 click. Definitely higher than background radiation. I pulled out my tablet and logged the reading, 2.3 Roentgens per hour. Not immediately dangerous, but well above normal for this stage of construction. "Brandon, I need you to clear this level," I said, my voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in the nuclear industry. "We've got elevated radiation readings." "It's probably just background scatter from the fuel rod storage area," Brandon replied, not moving. "The safety manual says anything under 5 Roentgens is acceptable for short-term exposure." That's when I knew this kid was going to get people killed. "The fuel rods aren't here yet," I said slowly, like I was explaining basic math to a first grader. "They won't arrive for 6 months. So where's this radiation coming from?" I didn't wait for his answer. I'd been a Navy CB for 6 years, building everything from temporary reactors in Desert Storm to classified installations that still don't officially exist. After I got out, I worked my way up through every level of nuclear construction. Boiling water reactors, pressurized water reactors, and even some projects where the security clearance paperwork was thicker than the technical manuals. In all that time, I'd learned one thing. When the Geiger counter starts clicking where it shouldn't, you stop everything and find out why. I pulled out the X-ray film I'd been examining before the radiation alarm. The weld looked perfect on the surface, but the radiographic image told a different story. Internal porosity, incomplete penetration, and what looked suspiciously like slag inclusion. This wasn't just substandard work. This was reactor vessel material that would fail under pressure. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the date stamp on the film. The X-ray was supposedly taken yesterday, but the serial number matched a film I'd seen 3 weeks ago. Someone was recycling inspection images. "This section fails spec," I said, marking the film with a red pen. "We need to cut it out and re-weld." Brandon stepped closer, his expensive cologne cutting through the smell of hot metal and welding flux. "Dennis, you're being too conservative. These welds are within acceptable parameters. I've got 3 independent consultants who reviewed the same films." "Which consultants?" I asked. "Technical advisors from our corporate risk management team." I almost laughed. Corporate risk management. These were probably the same geniuses who'd calculated that it was cheaper to pay wrongful death settlements than install proper safety equipment. "Brandon, do any of your technical advisors have NRC Level 5 certification?" His silence told me everything. "Do any of them have hands-on nuclear construction experience?" More silence. "Have any of them ever seen what happens when reactor vessel steel fails under 2,500 psi of superheated steam?" Brandon pulled out his phone, probably to call one of his consultants. "Dennis, I understand. You're concerned about safety. That's why we hired you. But we also have schedule commitments and financial obligations. The board can expect whatever they want," I interrupted, "but the laws of physics don't negotiate with quarterly earnings reports." I thought about my son Michael then. Staff Sergeant Michael Stone, killed by an IED in Afghanistan in 2018. He was 29 when he died, the same age as Brandon. But Michael understood something that Brandon never would. Some things are more important than being popular or profitable. Michael's last letter to me, the one I found in his footlocker after the funeral, said it best. "Dad, I know you worry about me over here, but I'm doing what you taught me. I'm making sure the job gets done right no matter what. Some things are more important than being popular." The radiation readings were still climbing, 2.7 Roentgens now. "Brandon, I'm ordering an immediate work stoppage until we identify the radiation source." His face went red. "You can't shut down the entire site over a minor safety concern." "Watch me," I said, keying my radio. "All crews, this is Dennis Stone, Site Safety Officer. Immediate work stoppage. Clear the containment vessel. This is not a drill." Brandon grabbed my arm. Dennis, you're overreacting. Do you know what a shutdown costs per day? Do you understand the penalties for missing our commissioning deadline? I looked at his soft hand on my arm, then back at his face. Do you understand what happens to 25,000 people if this reactor fails? That's when I saw it in his eyes. He did understand. He just didn't care. Brandon, I said quietly, I need a straight answer. Where did the reactor vessel steel come from? American suppliers, just like the specifications require. Which suppliers? I need to see the mill certificates. That's procurement information. I'd have to check with... You don't know, do you? I said. You have no idea what we're building this reactor with. The Geiger counter was clicking faster now. 3.1 Roentgens. Dennis, I need a decision, Brandon said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a threatening tone. Sign the inspection report or I'll find someone who will. I looked at the failed X-ray. I looked at the climbing radiation readings. I thought about the 25,000 people who lived within the emergency evacuation zone, including families with children, elderly folks in nursing homes, and everyone else who trusted that the professionals knew what they were doing. Then I thought about Michael and what he died protecting. I won't sign fraudulent paperwork, I said. Brandon's mask slipped completely. You're fired, Dennis, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. He had no idea what he'd just done. In the nuclear industry, you don't just fire the lead safety inspector, especially not one with NRC Level 5 certification, especially not one whose signature was legally required on every major component installation. Brandon Wells was about to learn this the hard way. I unclipped my dosimeter and radiation badge, laying them on the inspection table next to the failed X-rays. The Geiger counter was still clicking at 3.1 Roentgens. Whatever was causing those readings, it was Brandon's problem now. Good luck explaining this to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I said. What's that supposed to mean? Brandon snapped. Check your insurance policy, key personnel clause. Without my certification on site, your construction license is void. I could see Jeremy Walsh, the site security supervisor, walking toward us. Jeremy was a good guy, former Army MP, and he looked genuinely uncomfortable about what he'd been asked to do. Sorry, Dennis, Jeremy said quietly. I've got orders to escort you out. No problem, Jeremy. Just doing your job. As we walked toward the exit, I pulled out my phone and opened the NRC database app. Every certified nuclear inspector has access to the real-time site status system. I scrolled to the Lone Star nuclear facility and updated my employment status. Terminated, no replacement on site. The moment I hit submit, the site's status automatically changed from active construction to suspended pending review. In nuclear construction, there are no exceptions to the key personnel requirements. Zero. None. Brandon had just triggered federal oversight protocols that would shut down his entire project. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my F-250 in the parking lot when my phone rang. Ryan Foster's name appeared on the screen. Ryan was an old Navy buddy who'd become a forensic nuclear engineer after his service. We'd served together in the Gulf, building temporary reactors for forward operating bases where the nearest backup was 500 miles of desert away. Dennis, Ryan's voice was sharp. I just got an alert from the NRC database. Your site went red flagged 15 minutes ago. Brandon Wells just fired the only level 5 inspector in Texas, I said. Ryan actually laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Does that Stanford genius realize he just triggered an automatic federal review? He's about to find out. Dennis, I'm pulling up the site files right now. This is interesting. The Lone Star facility has been on our watch list for 6 weeks. Watch list for what? Irregularities in material procurement. We've been tracking shipping manifests that don't add up. Steel deliveries with weights that don't match nuclear-grade specifications. I felt the familiar cold anger I hadn't experienced since Desert Storm. Ryan, I found recycled X-ray films today. Same serial numbers, different dates. They're using fake inspection reports. The line went quiet for a moment. Dennis, if they're falsifying weld inspections on reactor vessel components, it's not just fraud, I finished. It's terrorism with a balance sheet. Where are you right now? Parking lot, about to head home. Don't go home yet. I'm making some calls. This might be bigger than just Brandon. Wells cutting corners for his IPO. While I waited for Ryan to call back, I thought about the radiation readings. 3.1 Roentgens with no fuel rods on site meant contaminated materials. In nuclear construction, the only way you get those readings is if someone's using recycled steel from decommissioned reactors, or, worse, from areas that had been exposed to radiation leaks. I'd seen it once before, in the early 1990s, when some genius contractor in Ukraine tried to use steel from the Chernobyl cleanup in a new reactor project. The material was cheap because it was contaminated. It was also completely illegal and deadly. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my daughter. "Dad, I saw on the news that Lone Star Nuclear suspended operations. Everything okay?" I texted back, "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just some regulatory paperwork. How's work? Busy analyzing shipping data for a client." Funny thing, I keep seeing anomalies in steel import manifests. Companies claiming nuclear-grade material, but the shipping weights are all wrong. I called her immediately. "Jessica, this is important. What company are you analyzing?" "I can't give specifics because of the NDA, but it's a major construction firm with projects across the Southwest. The data doesn't make sense. They're importing steel labeled as nuclear grade from overseas suppliers, but the density calculations are off by 15%. How long have you been tracking this?" "About 2 months. My supervisor thinks it's just clerical errors in the manifests, but the pattern is too consistent. It's like someone's deliberately mislabeling materials." 20 minutes later, Ryan called back. "Dennis, we need to meet. I just got off the phone with the FBI Nuclear Security Division. They've been building a case against illegal steel importation for nuclear facilities. Your site isn't the only one." "How many sites are we talking about?" "Potentially dozens across 3 states. All of them connected to Wells Construction and their subsidiary companies." "Dennis, this isn't just about your project. If they've been installing contaminated steel in multiple reactor facilities, the implications hit me like a physical blow. Multiple reactors with compromised materials, hundreds of thousands of people at risk, and Brandon Wells was just the front man for something much larger." "Where do you want to meet?" I asked. "Miller's Diner on Highway 35. 1 hour. And Dennis, don't mention this to anyone else yet. If Wells Construction realizes we're onto them, they might try to destroy evidence." I sat in my truck for a few more minutes, watching the site security guards chain the gates shut. The federal suspension order had already arrived. Through my binoculars, I could see Brandon standing near the site trailer, frantically talking on his phone. He was probably calling his Uncle Harold, the CEO, trying to explain how a simple personnel change had shut down their entire operation. What Brandon didn't understand yet was that firing me wasn't a personnel change. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that was about to destroy everything he'd built on lies. I started the engine and headed toward Highway 35. The war was just beginning, and I had allies Brandon didn't know about. As I drove away, I could see the red warning lights flashing on the crane towers. The site was officially dead in the water until the NRC completed their review. In nuclear construction, that process typically took 6 to 8 months. Brandon Wells was about to learn that some fights you can't win with an MBA and a corporate expense account. Miller's Diner looked exactly like you'd expect. Worn vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting that flickered, and coffee that could strip paint. But it was quiet, out of the way, and the kind of place where 3 men could have a serious conversation without attracting attention. Ryan Foster was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a man I didn't recognize. The stranger wore a dark suit that screamed federal agent, and he had the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "Dennis," Ryan said as I slid into the booth, "this is Agent Zachary Moore, FBI Nuclear Security Division." Agent Moore shook my hand with a grip like a bench vise. "Mr. Stone, we've been monitoring the Lone Star facility for 6 weeks. Your termination this morning triggered our investigation protocols." "What kind of monitoring?" I asked. Moore opened a tablet and slid it across the table. The screen showed shipping manifests, delivery schedules, and a map of nuclear facilities across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Red pins marked sites where Wells Construction had active contracts. "We've been tracking irregularities in steel procurement for nuclear facilities," Moore explained. "Companies importing material labeled as nuclear grade, but the shipping weights don't match the density specifications for high-grade steel." "How many sites are we talking about?" I asked. 17 facilities across 3 states, all of them using steel supplied through Wells Construction's procurement network. Ryan leaned forward. "Dennis, show him the X-ray films." I pulled out my phone and showed Moore the photos I'd taken of the recycled inspection reports. Same serial numbers, different dates. They're reusing old X-rays to fake current inspections. Moore's jaw tightened. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 3 months, based on the dates I could verify. But if they're doing this at 17 sites, We're looking at systematic fraud on a scale we've never seen before, Moore finished. Mr. Stone, we need your help. What kind of help? We need you back on that site. I stared at him. Brandon Wells fired me 6 hours ago. Security escorted me off the property. Moore smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Mr. Wells fired a private contractor. I'm appointing a federal auditor to oversee the site preservation during the suspension. You now work for the United States government. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Moore would petition the federal court for an emergency inspection order. As the only certified Level 5 inspector available in Texas, I would be appointed as the federal auditor. Ryan would come as my technical advisor. While we waited for the court order, Moore showed me the evidence they'd already collected. The shipping manifest told a disturbing story. Wells Construction had been importing steel from overseas suppliers, mostly from China and former Soviet bloc countries. The material was labeled as nuclear grade, but the weight calculations were consistently 15% below specification. 15% lighter means higher carbon content, Ryan explained. It also means potential contamination from recycled sources. Recycled from where? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Decommissioned reactors, medical facilities, research labs, anywhere radioactive steel gets sold as scrap, Moore said. It's cheap, it's available, and it's completely illegal for use in new nuclear construction. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Dad, my client just asked me to stop the steel import analysis. They're claiming the data I found was within acceptable variance. Something feels wrong about this. I showed the text to Moore. My daughter's been analyzing the same shipping data for a client. They just told her to stop. What's your daughter's company? Moore asked. Precision Data Analytics. They do logistics consulting for construction firms. Moore and Ryan exchanged a look. Dennis, Ryan said carefully, Precision Data Analytics is a subsidiary of Wells Construction. Your daughter's been unknowingly investigating her own client. The pieces clicked into place. Brandon hadn't just been cutting corners on my site. He'd been running a systematic operation to use contaminated steel across multiple nuclear facilities. And when Jessica's analysis started getting too close to the truth, they tried to shut her down. They don't know she's my daughter, do they? I asked. Probably not, Moore said. But they will soon. Mr. Stone, your daughter might be in danger. People have killed for much less than what she's uncovered. I called Jessica immediately. Sweetheart, I need you to listen very carefully. Don't go back to your office. Don't go home. Pack a bag and stay with your aunt in Dallas until I tell you it's safe. Dad, what's going on? The client you've been analyzing? They're not just cooking the books. They're endangering lives. The FBI is involved now. There was a long pause. Dad, are you saying my data analysis uncovered a criminal conspiracy? I'm saying you're the smartest person I know, and you found something they're willing to kill to protect. An hour later, Moore's phone rang. Court orders approved, he said after hanging up. We move on the site tomorrow morning. What about Brandon? I asked. He's been calling his Uncle Harold all afternoon, Moore said. Our surveillance team has been monitoring their communications. Brandon's panicking, Harold's trying to contain the situation, and their lawyers are probably billing overtime to figure out how deep in trouble they are. Ryan spread architectural drawings across the table. Dennis, I want you to look at these. These are the original reactor vessel specifications versus what was actually installed. The differences were subtle but deadly. Wall thickness reduced by 8%. Grade specifications downgraded from nuclear-hardened steel to commercial construction material. Weld patterns that would create stress concentration points under pressure. If this reactor ever went online, Ryan said quietly, it would fail within 5 years. Maybe less. What would that look like? I asked. Best case scenario? Controlled shutdown with massive radioactive contamination. Worst case? Ryan paused. Think Chernobyl, but in the middle of Texas. I thought about the 125,000 homes this reactor was supposed to power. I thought about the families living within 25 miles of the facility. I thought about Michael and what he'd died protecting. Tomorrow morning, I was going back to that site. Not as Dennis Stone, fired contractor, but as a federal auditor with the full authority of the United States government behind me. Brandon Wells was about to learn that you don't mess with national security and call it acceptable risk. We arrived at the site the next morning in a convoy of black SUVs. Brandon was waiting in the parking lot, looking like he hadn't slept. Behind him stood Harold Wells, the CEO, and Brandon's uncle. Harold was 58, gray-haired, and had the soft look of a man who'd spent too many years in boardrooms instead of construction sites. "What's the meaning of this?" Harold demanded as Agent Moore stepped out of the lead vehicle. "Federal Nuclear Safety Inspection," Moore replied, handing him a red envelope. "Court order. Your facility is under federal oversight pending review." Brandon pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal. "You can't bring him back here. He's been terminated for insubordination." "Mr. Wells terminated a private contractor," Moore said calmly. "I'm appointing a federal auditor. Mr. Stone now works for the United States government." The look on Brandon's face was worth 28 years of dealing with MBA idiots who thought they understood physics. Ryan and I spent the morning documenting everything. What we found was worse than systematic fraud. It was deliberate sabotage of nuclear safety protocols. The contaminated steel was everywhere. Reactor vessel walls, coolant piping, structural supports. Every critical component had been built with material that would fail under operational stress. The smoking gun came from Scott Freeman, a 24-year-old welding apprentice who'd been keeping detailed notes in a pocket notebook. Scott had military family. His father was Marine infantry who'd served 3 tours in Iraq, and he understood the importance of following proper procedures. "Mr. Stone," Scott said, his hands shaking as he showed me his notebook, "I've been documenting every questionable order Mr. Wells gave us. My dad always told me, if something doesn't feel right, write it down." Scott's notes were meticulous. Night shifts where Brandon personally supervised the installation of off-spec steel. Threats against workers who asked questions about the unusual radiation readings. Instructions to use recycled X-ray films for inspections that were never actually performed. But the most damning evidence was in Scott's phone. "I recorded one of the conversations," Scott whispered. "Mr. Wells was arguing with his uncle about the cost overruns. He said they could save $15 million by using alternative source materials, and nobody would know the difference until after the reactor went online." I listened to the recording twice. Brandon's voice was clear. "Uncle Harold, the reactor will run for at least 5 years before the steel degradation becomes noticeable. By then, we'll have taken the company public and cashed out. Let the next owners deal with the maintenance issues. 5 years." Brandon had knowingly installed materials that would cause a nuclear disaster in 5 years, all to boost the company's IPO valuation. Agent Moore made his move at noon. Brandon was in his site trailer, frantically shredding documents when the FBI walked in. Harold Wells was arrested at corporate headquarters the same day. The charges read like something out of a legal thriller: conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of nuclear safety regulations, endangering national security, racketeering, and about 6 other federal crimes that each carried 20-year sentences. "Mr. Wells," Moore said as they put Brandon in handcuffs, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to endanger nuclear facilities. You have the right to remain silent." Brandon looked at me as they led him past the inspection station. "You've destroyed everything," he screamed. "Do you know how many jobs this will cost? How many investors will lose their money?" "I know how many lives you would have cost," I replied. "Sleep well in federal prison, Brandon." 8 months later, I was sitting in my new office in Austin with a nameplate that read Dennis Stone, Chief Nuclear Safety Officer, Southwest Region. The salary was double what I'd been making, the pension was federal, and I had ultimate authority over nuclear safety inspections for Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. The Lone Star facility was completely demolished and rebuilt from the foundation up. Every piece of contaminated steel was removed and disposed of properly at a specialized facility in Nevada. The project timeline was extended to 6 years, with enhanced oversight at every stage. Brandon Wells was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Harold Wells got 15 years, and Wells Construction was dissolved. The investors lost $400 million, but the people of Texas were safe. The reactor, when it finally came online, was built right, with American steel, American workers, and American safety standards. Jessica called me the day the new nuclear safety regulations were announced. The media was calling them the Stone Protocols, enhanced inspection requirements, and mandatory whistleblower protections for all nuclear facilities nationwide. "Dad," she said, "I saw the news about the regulations being named after you. Michael would be proud." I looked out my office window at the Texas plains. Somewhere out there, young men and women were serving their country, trusting that the people back home were doing their jobs right. Brandon Wells had forgotten that trust is earned through competence, not confidence. The Navy taught me that some fights are worth having, even when you think you'll lose. Michael died protecting people he'd never met in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map. He did it because he understood that freedom isn't free and safety isn't an accident. Brandon thought he could bully an old sailor into compromising nuclear safety for corporate profits. He learned the hard way that you don't mess with a man who's already buried his son for doing the right thing. These days, when some young MBA tries to cut corners on a nuclear project, they hear about the Lone Star incident. They hear about what happens when you put quarterly earnings ahead of public safety. They hear about Dennis Stone, and they think twice. The reactor now provides clean energy for 125,000 homes across central Texas. It was built right, with proper materials and honest inspections. It'll run safely for 60 years. Brandon Wells is learning welding techniques in federal prison. I hear he's still not very good at following proper procedures. Sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to, and sometimes it takes an old Navy Seabee to make sure it does. Michael would understand. In the end, they didn't fire Dennis Stone. They fired the one man standing between their greed and a nuclear disaster. Sometimes standing up for what's right costs you everything you think you want, but saves everything that actually matters.